And those are both alternatives when we get those drive kinds of things. The person can go into overdrive and bite off more than he can chew, take on more than he can carry, knock his head against the world trying to do more than is possible. And the person can also say, if I can't do it my way, I won't play. Forget it, just I'm leaving, stop the ship, I want off, and turn everything inside and disappear in one way or another. So here we have another of those interesting charts. Scorpio in the first house, including Jupiter, Moon, Venus there, and the East Point is there also a little earlier. And Saturn and Pluto conjunct in Leo in the 10th. Plus Mars and Sun conjunct, with Mars in the first degree of Capricorn. It's actually just under 2 Capricorn, barely, almost 2. And we have a strong second house, 8th house, which are the Taurus, Scorpio houses, quite emphasized. So this is a powerhouse chart, no question about it. Powerhouse. The issue is, what's he going to do with the power? Is he going to use it in the world? Is he going to turn it against himself, block it, sit on it, become sick, or cop out in some other way? And I personally feel that when you look at a chart, you can't really be sure what the person will do with it. All you can do as an astrologer is point out the alternatives and leave it up to them to choose the more positive, less painful alternatives. So we can say to this still fairly young man, you have a drive for power. It's really important in your nature. You need an outlet for it. You need to do something competitive. It could be politics or competitive business, military service. Those are all appropriate. Stylized competition things, sports, games, something where you feel your power affecting the world. You make the world pay attention to you, and you feel like you're having an impact on it. The drive for control over the world in some way, showmanship, or teaching, or selling and promoting, or any number of other things where you put your will on the world and the world looks up. So that's certainly one of the basic themes in the chart that hits you first when you look at it. Tremendous concentration on power, the need to have some kind of power over the world, and the need to have power over himself. Scorpio in the first house. If that's handled properly, the person has self-control. He may very successfully put up masks, and you may never know what's going on inside. But there's a driving urge for self-mastery there. Now, simultaneously, we have the Sagittarius Gemini. As we said yesterday, that gives us a perpetual student, or the natural traveler, the person who is curious about life, who wants to know more. And depending on the person, they may live a great deal in their head, but where we have this fixed emphasis and cardinal houses, we could expect that some of it is certainly going to be operating with the mind, talking to people, teaching, writing, traveling, but maybe even especially an inclination towards travel, which isn't so mentally demanding, and lets the person just kind of do it. Because you get the impression with the South Node on Mercury that there is some kind of challenge there in that handling of the mind and ideals. Now, maybe the challenge is in handling the material world, because it is across the 2nd and the 8th house. And we do have that very strong Scorpio thing. Many times you'll find the nodes in the 2nd and the 8th, as I think I said before, where the person is struggling between appetite indulgence and appetite mastery. They want to enjoy the riches of the world, sensuality and pleasures and possessions, but there's also the sense of I want to be master, I want to be in control of my sensuality, my appetites, my world. So maybe there's a challenge there. You'll find this kind of thing with one person. They may be dieting one week and overeating the next. Another person may be smoking and wishing they could cut down on their smoking. Somebody else may be drinking alcohol and feeling like maybe they shouldn't drink quite so much. Someone else may be debating sex versus celibacy. Someone else may want to spend it versus wanting to save it. Generally speaking, fire in the second house is going to be extravagant, and that includes generous. Remember, fire is the essence of confidence, faith. There'll be more. I can give it away, throw it away. I can always get more. So there's a tendency for it just to go through and out really quickly. So maybe learning to conserve a little bit is part of the lesson there. But in some way, the lesson is connected either to the Taurus, Scorpio, or a little more to the Gemini, Sag. And frequently I'm not sure which it is. And I talk to the person a bit to try to find out. If it's in Gemini, Sagittarius, it's more the mutable dilemma, which is the interest in everything, totally scattered and diffused in all directions, versus being very clear about ultimate goals and values and faith and directions. But here we've got all that fixity. So it says, no, this doesn't look like a scattered chart. This looks like a very persisting person who makes up his mind and keeps going till he gets there no matter what. So it doesn't look like scatter is the problem. Maybe excessive ideals, aiming too high, wanting too much. That looks a little more like it, with the over-intensity of the Leo and the Scorpio. The security drive, the pleasure drive, the power drive, some kind of excesses maybe as the lesson of the combination of Sagittarius and second house, therefore the node. Whether it's in mental activities, in ideals, aspirations, goals, or in coping with the material world and pleasures and possessions. And we can notice that we have also some fairly close aspects there between the water planets and Mercury and Uranus, kind of tied to each other. And I see that as psychic potential. Water is the unconscious. That's where we are open to the world beyond the physical senses and beyond logic. And a person can be extremely psychic with a water emphasis, the water planets related to each other, but it may never get into consciousness unless you bring air in also. So if you've got Mercury and Uranus in the picture, are air planets, or air signs or houses, then you have the potential of a connection between the conscious and the unconscious. The person may be able to get the contents of the unconscious up into consciousness and have some kind of an effective use of this awareness. And we note here Pluto and Neptune, two water planets, are sextile each other, as many, many people have had this since about 1940. We've had that sextile for the whole rest of the century. And Moon and Uranus are exactly quincunx. That's exact to the degree. And Uranus is retrograding. It's going to hold that aspect for years and years of the life. And Mercury is widely opposite Uranus, but it's exactly sextile Neptune and pretty closely trine Pluto. And so we get these ties between the conscious and the unconscious, and just having a lot of water in the first house suggests there's some kind of natural psychic openness. Well, that's an asset if the person is not too caught in it, if they're not overwhelmed by it, if there's also some kind of earth in the chart. Virgo, Capricorn, 6th house, 10th house. Here we have Saturn in its own house. We have Mars and Pallas and Capricorn. We have a strong second house, too. It's very rooted in the solid earth. So it looks as if he's got enough earth there, so he's not going to be carried away by psychic openness. So then it's an asset, in all probability. That is something we can draw on when we want to go beyond physical senses and logic where they will take us. Some of you may know about the book Executive ESP, written by Douglas Dean and another engineer a few years back, where they tested business executives who had they divided them into two groups. One group had been very successful. They had doubled their company's earnings or done even better in a period of time. And the other group had just held their own or lost ground. And every one of the really successful business executives had that extra plus, that little extra psychic ability, in a precognitive test, guessing the future, guessing numbers that were going to be picked out by a computer later by random number table. And the people that had just been holding their own or losing ground were operating at chance expectancy, or less than chance, actually, where they were even blocking their psychic ability. You know, there are psi missers. That's one of the terms in parapsychology and psychic research for the people who get less than chance consistently, which means that they block their psychic ability, usually because they don't trust it, they're skeptical of it. Usually there's some heavy earth emphasis in the chart, and they're not accepting that input. So there was a very clear dichotomy between the two groups in this test. The people who were super successful are the people who have that little extra plus. They are open to go beyond physical senses and logic. But we do have to always take it back down and test it on Earth afterwards, because you can get into a variety of extreme hot water if you just accept any thought, feeling that comes to you from the great unconscious. Your unconscious might just lead you right down the garden path at times. One of my more extreme cases that I know of that happening was a man who had was getting psychic voices, and he kept following their inclination, their leading, what they were telling him. And he first lost his business, and then his home, and his big fancy trailer camper, and finally his wife decided she'd had it, that she couldn't handle it anymore. So he's really totally abandoned. He lost everything following these psychic voices and doing unwise investments and speculations and this and that. And the final culmination was he was told by his psychic voices that he should borrow $10,000 and import guitars from Taiwan and sell this large shipment of guitars, which he could import at a very cheap price from Taiwan. You would think that by that time he might have gotten the message that his psychic ability was not totally dependable, but he did it. He actually borrowed $10,000, and the guitars arrived in Tucson, Arizona, in the very dry desert air, and split. The whole shipment just wiped out. So I'm just saying there's a balance point between being open to the psychic and 1 foot solidly on the ground to test it. Check it out. A little bit of Virgo or Capricorn, or at least some Taurus, to check it out and keep back and forth, back and forth between the two. And of course, this is how science really works, although they wouldn't admit it. They get a theory, and the theory is usually an intuitive flash, but then they go test the theory. They look at experience. And where it doesn't quite fit, then they revise it and try it again. You keep testing a theory against life, against experience, and eventually, hopefully, you come up with a working model that helps. In the end, though, the model never quite fits the world, because the model is an abstract conception, and the world is always a little more complex. We never quite understand it. And you will see people, unfortunately, trying to force the world into the model, constantly trying to force the world to fit the model. So it's like the old myth of the Procrustean bed. If you didn't fit the bed, if you're too tall, they cut your feet off. If you're too short, they stretch you to make you fit the bed. And unfortunately, a lot of people who are into building models about the world tend to prefer the model to the world, because the model's nice and neat and tidy, and the world is messy and has little tag ends that don't quite work. So they keep chopping off pieces of the world and trying to make it fit. Do you have a question?